You have now been introduced to two of the three components that comprise the dragon defense: the traditional rock and the active rock playing styles. The third and final component is an aggressive betting style, which I'll discuss in this chapter. All the previous chapters have been based on the results of statistical analysis and computer simulations. Chapter 12, however, focuses on psychological factors, so I've saved the art of raising for last. You can think of it as the chapter on psychological warfare. The typical rock generally has little difficulty minimizing his losses, as he tends to play just premium hands, so he rarely walks into an opponent's trap. But because his opponents know him to be a rock, he frequently has difficulty maximizing his wins. This chapter describes a collection of techniques that, when taken as a group, should help overcome that problem, by encouraging your opponents to think of you as an indecisive, chaotic player, while in fact you are strictly following the rules of the rock. But first I'll need to define one of the key factors: leverage. Each time you call, bet, or raise, you're paying some number of chips into the pot. If you win, the reward will be the return of your chips, plus any chips wagered by your opponents. The more opponents you have, the greater the reward will be if you win. This is called leverage. It reflects your expected return on investment. If you have only one opponent in the hand with you, you have 1-to-1 leverage. With two opponents, you're getting 2-to-1 leverage, and so on. The more opponents you have in the hand with you, the greater your leverage. So your leverage is determined strictly by the number of callers you have. There will typically be more callers early in the hand, and fewer as you near the showdown. So your leverage always starts at its maximum before the flop, and progresses towards its minimum at the showdown. Ideally, you would only pay chips into the pot when your leverage is at its maximum, and none when it's at its minimum. That would give you your maximum return on your investment while minimizing your risk. And finally, you should also strive to maintain high leverage as long as possible. It's true that you typically have much more control over when you decide to bet than over how long your opponents stay in the hand, but it's not entirely out of your control. You can, for example, encourage them to stay in the hand longer, especially if you consider their motivations. This leads us into our next topic: respect. Respect is bad for profits. If your opponents respect you, they'll worry whenever you come out betting. They'll worry even more when you raise. But if respect is bad, is contempt good? Well, perhaps contempt is too strong a word. Your opponents may like you, or they may find you slightly irritating. They may even pity you, but they mustn't fear you. So you must try to avoid alarming your opponents. This means you have to make a choice. You must choose between two mutually exclusive goals: crushing the life out of your opponents, or maximizing your profits. No matter how satisfying it might be to crush your opponents, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women, it simply isn't good for business. So concentrate on the latter, maximizing your profits. So you must try to desensitize your opponents to your bets and raises. That's the next topic I'll describe: calm your opponents. There are a number of do's and don'ts associated with calming your opponents. First, the more you raise or come out betting, the less they'll be shocked by it. In fact, the best response would be, "There he goes again. What a donkey." So when your pot odds allow you to bet or raise, bet aggressively. Anytime the break-even point of players is in the hand, you have the option of checking, betting, or raising. Whichever you choose, you'll break even. So choose to raise. There are some exceptions to this rule, but in general, raise whenever pot odds allow it. Your opponents are more likely to call when they know how much it'll cost them to see the next card. So if you're known for never re-raising, you'll be enticing more callers, whereas re-raising and check-raising will be seen as extremely aggressive. Personally, I have a rule against check-raising. I rarely do it. But if you have an absolutely unbeatable hand, also called the nut hand, that would be an acceptable time to re-raise or check-raise. Fold as early as possible. As soon as you no longer have correct pot odds to continue in the hand, check or fold. Never chase is good advice at any time, but here it's critical. For example, imagine that you flopped a 4 flush on the button, and are intending to bet, but an earlier player bets and has 3 callers by the time it's your turn to act, so naturally you raise. Now imagine that the original bettor re-raises, and everyone else folds. Suddenly you're no longer receiving pot odds to continue in the hand. Given the choice of pursuing a bad bet or folding, it's far better to fold while saying something like, "You caught me," implying that you'd been caught bluffing. Hopefully a few of those who folded will be tempted to call next time. And at the very least, it may appear that you can be easily chased off a hand. This will pay dividends later when you hold a monster, and an overly aggressive player attempts to bluff you into folding. Never show your hand unless required to do so by the rules of the game. Some players will show their hands to demonstrate just how close they came to winning, but it's far better to imply that you lost at the showdown with a pair of 4s than with a straight. And if someone actually asks what you folded, be evasive. Most people will take the hint and stop asking. Never mention the P words, probability, or pot odds, or anything hinting at statistical analysis, Monte Carlo simulations, or deterministic algorithms, all of which were used in researching the material for this course. Implying that you know anything about these topics can only be bad for business. So, if asked to explain some action you've made, just blame it on a gut feeling. Suggesting that your play is based on science may cause opponents to doubt their assumptions about you, and that's something you don't want. The longer they think you're a donkey, the better. And don't be blatant about it. There's no need to put on an act. Just let your actions speak for themselves. If anything, you might imply that you're superstitious. Knowing which opponents will fold or call when you raise is important to maximizing your profits. If you'll make more money by simply calling, then that's the choice you should make. This is the exception to the maxim, raise whenever possible. The fewer players who are scared into folding, the better it is for business. There's an interesting psychological phenomenon at play here. Research suggests that when gamblers almost win, they feel more inclined to take the same risk again. And the longer they stay in the hand, the more likely they are to improve their hand. Thus, the closer they get to almost winning. So by avoiding scaring them into folding, you are in fact enticing them to chase. In practice, this typically takes the form, you'll raise after the flop, but on the turn and river, you'll simply call, even when you hold the winning hand. This will encourage those players who would normally fold to stay in the hand for just one more card. Now let's review the art of raising. Betting or raising when you have maximum leverage will help increase your profits, while reducing your betting or raising when you have minimum leverage will help minimize your losses. So have no regrets about betting aggressively right up to the showdown and then pulling in your horns and checking. While it may appear to your opponents that you have no idea what constitutes a winning hand, you will actually be minimizing the risk when you're receiving minimum leverage. To encourage the maximum number of players to stay in the hand as long as possible, never crush an opponent, humiliate him, or question his playing ability. The less your opponents fear you, the better it is for future profits. Respect is bad for profits, and fear is even worse. So avoid causing your opponents to question their assumptions about you. For example, never show your cards when you don't have to, and never mention the P words, probability and pot odds. To desensitize opponents to your raises, rather than simply calling, Raise whenever pot odds allow it. Then check or fold when pot odds demand that. Appearing indecisive and chaotic is an investment in future profits. Done properly, your opponents will rarely be able to guess what you're holding, but they won't care. They'll think you're a donkey, and they'll want to punish you at the very first opportunity. Finally, and most importantly, know your opponents. You need to be aware of who will fold and who will call, so you'll know whether you'll win more by raising or simply calling. This knowledge is essential to maximizing your profits. Hello, this is Tyson Wood. Our goal here at Strategic Hold'em is simple, to help you play smarter poker. You can help us spread the word by sharing our web address with a friend. And you can help us keep the lights on at Strategic Hold'em by making a donation. We plan to continue our research and release more poker tutorials as new results come available. If you have any topic suggestions, please send them to feedback@strategichold'em.com. All your comments are welcome. We'd particularly like to hear about your most successful bluffing tactics. On behalf of the entire team at Strategic Hold'em, good luck and good hunting.